You're listening to I Communicate with your host, Mark Altman, on Full Service Radio, AM 830 WCRN. Once again, here's Mark.
Welcome back to I Communicate. I'm your host, Mark Altman, and before we get into our final segment, I just need a special shout-out, and I'm going to use Dave's expression, the salt of the earth. Donald and Elaine Cousineau, got to say hi if you're listening today. And Donald, I got to tell you, you are the finest dresser I know. I mean, that red coat, when I first met you, that was something special, and I still can visualize it in my head, actually.
The red coats are coming.
The red coats are coming, definitely. So a special shout-out to you guys. Dave, I want to get into, you really spoke, I think, articulately of the how you've kind of balanced fatherhood and being a great husband. And, I know you have a very unique challenge, you and your wife, Jeannie. And, I know your son has Tourettes. And in addition, he's battling ADHD, OCD, ODD. And I want to just say one thing about Bobby. I don't get to see him very much, but I often think a good indication of a human being is what immediately floats to your head when you think of that person. And when I think of Bobby, all I can think of is a smiley, energetic kid. Like, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I got to ask you, Dave, first of all, is, he's your only child. When you first decided to have children and when Bobby was diagnosed four or so years ago, what was that like for you? Obviously, you love him unconditionally. Jeannie loves him unconditionally. That's not even up for debate. But what are the gamut of emotions that run through your head when you learn that this is something that he's going to have to deal with, you and Jeannie are going to have to deal with? What's that like?
Well, I guess with any parent learning that there's some issue with their child, you're right. There's a gamut of emotions that one runs through. I think that part of the canned answer that I've provided in the past is that, first of all, thank you for the comments about Bobby. And yes, he is energetic. He is full of life, full of love, and a fabulous boy. My wife uses the expression, you'd never know he has an issue until he doesn't. You'd never know he has Tourette's until he shows it. And because of that, kind of goes to what I was just going to say, which is we're still so blessed. We are so blessed with Bobby. Challenges, absolutely, every day, and always will. However, hate to say it this way, but gosh, things could be worse. He is active and physical and tremendous, strong, funny, witty. And so with all of that, I guess that keeps us in check with knowing that we have a son with a disability, but we're still very fortunate. I don't think I answered your question exactly, but that's part of the premise, I guess I would want to start out by saying we understand the disability that he has and where we're at in our lives with it.
So, Dave, I have to imagine that at times as a parent, there has to be a conundrum for you and Jeannie about when Bobby acts out a certain way. It's like, wait, is he just being a 12-year-old boy? Is this part of his condition? That has got to be such a struggle.
I've said for years now, that's my biggest struggle. Because he's so smart, I'm not sure if he's playing us sometime. Yeah. So it's almost impossible to tell at times, does this fall under the domain of Tourette's or of part of his OCD tendencies? Those, the ADHD, the OCD, the ODD, those are all modalities that kind of fall under the Tourette's umbrella, if you will. And different. Everybody is different with this condition. So I struggle all the time with, am I being too hard? Am I being too sensitive? Am I accurately reading the scenario? And boy, that is tough. And right or wrong, I think my wife and I typically err on the side of it falls under his condition because we are trying to have faith in the fact that he, at heart, is a good, smart boy. And I don't think he'd be acting in a, I don't want to say spiteful way, but acting in a way that would create a challenge to us. intentionally. So sometimes we try to sift out what's behavior of a soon-to-be teenager versus, oh, my wife's going to be upset that I said that, of a soon-to-be teenager compared to a child with a condition.
Dave, let me ask you, I think there's a lot of our listeners out there who don't necessarily know what Tourette's is. So before I ask you to explain it, I just want to ask you a quick thing. There was an old TV show I used to love called Boston Legal. In Boston Legal, there was an actor on the show who had Tourette's. And whenever we see that acted out on TV, there's either a tic, a facial tic, words come out involuntarily. I think that's what people typically associate. Is that an accurate portrayal, or is there more?
No, well, yes, and both. So everybody instinctively, or many people instinctively say, oh, Tourette's, that's where you stand up in a restaurant and yell swear words. Not necessarily the case. There's different levels, and by no means will I pretend to be an expert on all the levels, the terminology, or all the conditions of it. I can mostly speak to our world and what we deal with. I will try to give you the Reader's Digest version. I never forgot. Bobby was in the car and he started shaking his head, and I thought, oh, did you get something in your eye, or you need a haircut or something? I said, what's going on, bud? He said, I don't know. He didn't even realize he was shaking his head. And over the course of the next 3 days, it was consistent. Both he and my wife are figure skaters, and we were on our way to a figure skating competition for him, and he was just constantly shaking his head, just a small shake, but as if you were trying to get hair out of your eyes or something, and did it through the entire weekend and the entire competition. And we said, well, something's not right. By the luck of the stars aligning, we had him in the doctor's office the next day, in the emergency room the day after that, just being drawn for blood to check to see for an EKG. 2 days later, we were in a pediatric neurological office, and they said, well, it's just a tic. And that was it. So a tic was just a physical manifestation of something that, again, sometimes the child in this case wouldn't even know what that he's doing it. So they gave us a sheet of paper that said, well, it could be Tourette's, it could be just a tic, it could be boys more prevalent than girls at the outstart, and it could be gone in 3 months. It could never go away. It could be just a head shake tic, and that's it. Or it could morph into different things. And they said the one thing you want to keep an eye out, or an ear out in this case, is a combination of a visual as well as an audible tic. If that's the case, and if that's the case for a minimum of 6 months, I think that actually a year, they said that it's likely that Tourette's would be a diagnosis. And that's exactly what came about with us. So we learned that he had Tourette's, and then we just started to dive in and learn as much as we could about it.
So, Dave, let me just ask you. I just want to ask you another challenging question on this. And I find my own son who doesn't have the challenges Bobby does, but he has Asperger's and has some social difficulties. And I feel like when you have a child, you want to educate them on it. You want them to understand so they're not ashamed of it or disappointed, because they don't need to be. But at the same time, I find with my own son, I don't want him to use it as an excuse to hold him back from anything. So what are your thoughts? And you and Jeannie discuss that, and feeling like, yes, you want him to be educated, not be ashamed, but also not use it as an excuse.
Our son is a champion in regard to that. He is very well aware of his condition. Never has he or have we hidden from it. We have always been exceedingly upfront about it and owned it. And I'll give shout out to one of Jeannie's friends. When one of the times we were struggling and felt Bobby was struggling because we just didn't have our arms around it completely, nor not that we ever will, but someone said to us, you know what? He's a superhero. And he's a superhero because he's had other enhanced, it's almost like, I think it was Daredevil. When Daredevil lost his sight, he had super hearing and super senses and so on and so forth. Well, Bobby's a superhero in that he feels like he's got heightened senses and heightened skills and capabilities in another way. And Bobby owned that. I grant you, he wants Hawkeye to be his superhero, and he feels like he's Hawkeye. But he has been proud of that, and we've kind of addressed it in a proud manner, as opposed to something that we kind of cower against.
Dave, a final question before we wrap up today. When Bobby graduates from high school, and you look back at parenting Bobby, and someone would to say to you, "How did you know you did a great job?" What would be your criteria, one or two criteria? You'd say, you know what? If Bobby's blank, then I know I did a great job.
If Bobby is, I would say if Bobby is someone that other people look up to, if Bobby is trustworthy, if Bobby is similar to my dad, and I would like to think has grasped onto the sensitivity and humor and characteristics that my wife and I try to show, and of course love, show. If he is able to encompass those things while handling the challenges that he has, that many people wouldn't realize that he goes forth with every day, I would say that's a little badge of honor. Well,
you would think I couldn't add anything to that list because it was such an amazing list, but and he stops being a Steelers fan.
Oh.
Okay, so that's just throwing that out there. Okay, anyway, Dave Cousineau, CEO, Forms and Supplies Unlimited, you are the best. You rock.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been Mark Altman, iCommunicate. We will see you next Thursday. Go Pats. Thanks, Ted.
Go Pats.
You've been listening to iCommunicate with your host, Mark Altman, on Full Service Radio, AM 830 WCRN.